Imagine a king so desperate for answers that he disguises himself in darkness and seeks counsel from the very forces he once outlawed. Saul's secret journey to Endor and the horrifying prophecy that awaited him marks the beginning of one of the Bible's most chilling tales, where disobedience and fear lead to a disastrous fate.
Saul and the Witch of Endor. Narration.
Saul's reign was collapsing, and Israel trembled as the Philistines massed for war. Samuel, the prophet and judge who had once guided the king, was dead, and the Lord no longer answered Saul's inquiries through dreams, prophets, or the sacred Urim. Desperate and terrified, Saul did the unthinkable. He asked his servants to find a woman who could speak with the dead.
Find her. Find the woman who speaks to the dead.
Under the cover of night, he disguised himself and slipped away to Endor, a city known for its illicit spiritual practices. When Saul arrived at the medium's humble dwelling, she was wary. Saul had previously banished all witches and sorcerers from Israel, so she feared a trap. The disguised king swore an oath that no harm would come to her and demanded, "Bring up for me the one I named to you." She consented reluctantly and began her forbidden ritual. Suddenly, she screamed. She saw a figure ascending from the darkness and realized her client was Saul himself. The king calmed her, asking what she saw. The medium described an elderly man draped in a robe, and Saul knew it was Samuel. He bowed low, trembling as the apparition appeared. The ghostly figure spoke with authority. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul confessed his fear. The Philistines were advancing and God had abandoned him. The apparition delivered a chilling message. He reminded Saul of his past disobedience, specifically his refusal to completely destroy Amalek as commanded, and declared that the Lord had torn the kingdom from him and given it to David. The Spirit prophesied that the Philistines would defeat Israel in the coming battle, and that Saul and his sons would die the next day, joining the dead. Saul collapsed onto the ground, overwhelmed by terror and weakness, for he had eaten nothing all day and night. The medium and his servants urged him to eat, preparing a meal to restore his strength. Though still shaken, Saul eventually rose and returned to his camp, knowing that his fate was sealed. He would face battle at Mount Gilboa, where the prophecy would be fulfilled. Saul and his sons would fall, and Israel would be routed. The haunting encounter at Endor was Saul's final act of rebellion and a stark reminder of the consequences of departing from God's commands.
The next morning, the prophecy began to unfold. When the Philistines attacked, their chariots and swords gave them a decisive advantage on the flat plains of the Jezreel Valley, forcing Israel's troops to retreat up the steeper slopes of Mount Gilboa. As the battle turned against Israel, the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua were killed, and the archers badly wounded Saul. Realizing he was mortally wounded and fearing abuse at the hands of the Philistines, Saul begged his armor-bearer to kill him. When the terrified man refused, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. Seeing his master dead, the armor-bearer also took his life. The remaining Israelite soldiers fled and abandoned their towns, and the Philistines occupied them. The following day, the Philistines returned to strip the corpses. They cut off Saul's head, stripped his armor, and sent news of their victory throughout their land. They placed his armor in the temple of Ashtoreth and fastened his body and the bodies of his sons to the wall of Beth Shan as trophies. This humiliation of Israel's king glorified pagan gods and was considered a fate worse than death. When the valiant men of Jabesh Gilead heard of this desecration, they set out under cover of night, risking their lives. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons, carried them to Jabesh, and burned them to remove the marks of abuse. They then buried the bones under a tamarisk tree and fasted for 7 days. The battle at Mount Gilboa was a catastrophic defeat for Israel. Saul's death and the death of his sons marked the end of his reign and cleared the way for David to become king. The Philistines' victory was so complete that they occupied Israelite towns and effectively cut the nation in half. The fall of Saul illustrates how the collapse of a leader can endanger an entire people and underscores the far-reaching consequences of disobedience.
From this dramatic tale emerge powerful lessons. First, obedience matters. Saul broke God's law by consulting a medium, ignoring the clear prohibitions against witchcraft and necromancy. Believers are called to trust God's guidance through scripture and prayer, rather than seeking forbidden knowledge. Second, patience is essential. Because God seemed silent, Saul took matters into his own hands instead of waiting on the Lord. When we become impatient with God's timing, we may choose shortcuts that lead to disaster. Third, hidden sin cannot be concealed. Saul disguised himself, signaling that he knew his actions were wrong. Yet secret sin ultimately leads to exposure and judgment. Fourth, the story highlights spiritual realities. Whether the apparition was truly Samuel or a demonic impersonation, the episode shows that dabbling in occult practices is dangerous and opens the door to deception. Finally, trust in God's sovereignty offers peace. Even in times of silence or uncertainty, believers can rest in the knowledge that God is at work and that obedience and faith will be rewarded. Ultimately, Saul's tragic visit to the witch of Endor serves as a cautionary tale for Christians today. In a world where horoscopes, tarot cards, and psychic readings are glamorized, this narrative reminds us to avoid occult practices and to seek God alone. When facing anxiety or unanswered prayers, we must resist the urge to control outcomes through illicit means and instead cling to God's promises, believing that His timing and His ways are best. By choosing faith over fear and obedience over rebellion, believers can walk confidently with God, knowing that even when His voice seems silent, He remains sovereign and trustworthy. In the end, Saul's desperate search for light led him deeper into the shadows. Remember, from Endor's darkness rose the dawn of a new kingdom.